It is said that the war in heaven, where it talks in the Bible, a war between Satan and God, was fought over the principle of freedom. The one side, the side represented by Christ, wanted to give free will to mankind, and Satan wanted to take the free will away and control everybody because they would not be responsible for their own free will, and they could make a lot of mistakes with their own free will. So his argument was that we'll take the free will away and I will assume command, and I will make sure that none of the souls are lost or go down the wrong path. I will get all the glory. And Christ, it is said the opposite. He says, we will give mankind their free will. Sure, they will make mistakes, but they will recover and they will learn on their own. And I will be their teacher, and I will give the glory to God, not take it upon myself. And the answer, the Father, it is told, the presiding one said, I will take the plan of the Christ, or of the one who became Jesus the Christ. And so the legend has it that the struggle between freedom and taking away freedom, the struggle continues on the earth today. And whether or not the legend is true is beside the point. What is true is that that struggle does exist right before our eyes today. Yet, unfortunately, again, every politician, every ruler, every person in authority thinks he is working for our freedom. Now let's get back to the worst guy we know about. Do you think Hitler thought he was fighting for freedom? He said it all the time. I'm fighting for the freedom of Germany, for your freedom and mine. Say that all the time. But was he? No, he was fighting so he could have control and tell the people what to do. And he thought that would, in his warped mind, he thought because once he got completely in charge of the world and could lay down all the rules, then people would actually have more freedom from a warped point of view, but not any type of personal incentive that they could operate on their own with impunity. The Brotherhood of Light teaches the principle of freedom, but he teaches it correctly. He just doesn't say, I'm going to give you freedom. You can't really give freedom to anybody. What the Brotherhood of Light does is they say, I'm not going to take your freedom away. The Dark Brother says, I'm going to change things, and you read between the lines, he's going to take your freedom away, but then in the next sentence he says, this will give you greater freedom. But it doesn't. It's a deception. What he does, he tells you it will give you greater freedom, but it doesn't. It's like the politicians do with our taxes. We're going to increase this tax here. That's going to give you less freedom, less money to spend, less money, less power over your own destiny. But we're going to give this benefit, and this benefit is going to give the people that get the benefit a lot more freedom. Well, yeah. Now, the people that get the benefit are what, usually 1% of the country. The people who's going to get taxed is 100% of the country. So the amount of freedom taken away is much more than the freedom given. The Light Brother will say, I'm not going to take additional freedom away, but I'm going to work to increase your freedom without taking anything away. That's what the Brother of Light will attempt to do. Okay, freedom is really a key word here because it's the key dividing point between the light and the dark. One thinks we need a good, strong, powerful central authority that's more intelligent than everybody else, that can tell everybody what to do and set them in line so that we can free them up by giving them what's right. The other side trusts in the intelligence of the average person and wants to give the average person more control over his own destiny. It's like the Founding Fathers said, freedom must be won by eternal vigilance. And what takes away freedom is corrupt power. Somebody seeking unjust power takes away our freedom. And keeping this lid on this eternal head does require eternal vigilance to a dimension that people don't realize. We think, in a lifetime, but here we learn that it is eternal, forever. For the life of this universe, there will be a struggle for power from one side or another. We just have to make sure that the power, this struggle for power brings the power of decision into play. So decision is always at play. And so we always have to choose which side of power to get on. And we want to choose that eternal choice always comes down to where will the most freedom lie. And where the most freedom lies is where we must make our choice. And the side that is corrupting power will always tell us that they are on the side of freedom. Both sides will always claim to be on the side of freedom. One really will. One is merely using it as a way to get power. And that is pretty much an eternal thing that we'll always have to worry about. In the Roman Empire, the slave was often allowed to have a business of his own. And he could operate that business, and he would give half of the profits to the master, and he could keep half the profits for himself and be pretty independent. And if he had a good master, well, he could, have a reasonable amount of freedom. He still couldn't take off and leave his master, though, and do something else. He had to stay with his master. Now, if you're working for corporate America, you're, somewhat tied down. But what enslaves us today, like the slave in ancient times, is a lot of people pay, if you add up all the taxes that you pay, a lot of people are paying 50% of their money to the government today, which makes us almost as much of a slave financially as a slave was that worked for his master and give 50% of his profits to his master. We're all enslaved to a degree, but this type of slavery in the old days, where if you run away, you were caught and whipped or killed or tortured.
So the IRS
yeah. Now the IRS just scares you to death. We haven't escaped slavery 100%. We've escaped this type of slavery. Now, each of us can choose where we want to work, what master we're going to work for, and things like this. We have freedoms the slaves in the Old South didn't have. Some people go to their job and they really like it and they don't see themselves being enslaved at all. Other people go to their jobs and don't like it and have to work there to make a living, and they feel like a slave. So a lot of it's a state of mind. But what I consider the greatest aspect of slavery in the modern age is just taxes, because in that way we're exactly like the slave in the Roman Empire, where he had to give 50% of his money to his master, of his profits to his master. And the average taxpayer today has to give close to 50% of his income to his master. And the only thing is, we can quit and circulate around a little bit, go from job to job. But so we moved ahead. That which was slavery then just moved up on a higher turn of the spiral. We're going to go into the beast a little bit later on and illustrate how the powers that be have such control over us that it does produce a slavery in the mind. And this has to be escaped, and it can only be escaped through the soul. One of the things about evolution is we go in steps of freedom. We increase freedom, and then we move ahead, and then we increase it some more. And throughout history, freedom overall is just slightly increased. And then we made a pretty big surge with the establishment of the Constitution of this country, where we made a big surge in freedom, and this wounded one of the heads of the beast, as it were, to death, as the scriptures tell us. But then the deadly wound was healed, so in other words, the power of the beast was able to creep in and take more control again after the foundation of the country. And so slavery is a evolving thing. We evolve from one point to another, and we do this as individuals too. As individuals, we're enslaved by our own thoughts and our own belief systems, and we shed certain beliefs, and we go on to a greater sphere of freedom, and then we shed other beliefs and things that hold us back, and we go into a greater sphere of freedom, and society does this, and we as individuals do this. And you can look at this in your own life, how maybe just in the past 10 years, you maybe have a greater sense of freedom inside of you now than you did 10 years ago. And if a person has a right state of mind, he can actually be in an enslaving position and not feel as enslaved as somebody that's like totally free. Like look at Britney Spears and what's the other gal? Lindsay Lohan. You know, we look at them, oh, these guys are completely free, you know. But Lindsay Lohan, I mean, she's just misusing her freedom, so it's really going to enslave her. She probably feels enslaved to a degree. And that's what's creating such a frustrating life for her, that in the point of greatest freedom, you can still feel enslaved, and in the point where you're most restricted, you can just, with the right state of mind, you can feel free. I look on my most enslaving conditions in my life. I won't go through what they were, but what I learned from that was how to feel free within my own mind in a very awkward situation. And I found myself being freer than many other people that were apparently in a very free situation. So a lot of freedom is a state of mind, but we want to match the state of mind with physical reality. We want to free people physically from everything that holds them bound. And this is one of the things that we're going to have as we move into the Aquarian age. We're going to move into greater and greater spheres of freedom. What we have right now as we're approaching the Aquarian age is two forces converging, the forces of darkness and the forces of light. The forces of light and freedom have certain plans and forces that are entering into human consciousness. The forces of slavery and taking us backwards to the Stone Age are trying to move us in the other direction. And these could also be called the building forces and destructive forces. And they're very active in the world today, and they're on a collision course right now. And we're approaching a point of tension, and when the dust is settled, we're going to learn whether we're going to move ahead to a new age of peace or go backward and lose a lot of the things that we've gained. People that have gone to very oppressed nations and visit them, especially Russia was particularly bad when it was in full power. It's a lot better now than it was, but when people have went and visited, I've read accounts of where people have visited these oppressed nations, and people look depressed. They don't talk to each other. There's no flow of ideas. They're afraid that somebody else will report what they've said, and they're afraid all the time. There's a spirit of fear. They're doing what's right, maybe, according to the state, but they have no freedom. And the greatest evil is always generated when people are forced to do what is right. And the force to do what is right has so much power behind it, because when you say, well, we need to create a law to make this happen, and people say, well, that would be good. Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. They don't even think about the principle of freedom involved. They never argue the principle of freedom. When our legislatures are talking about passing laws, the argument is never over, will this take away freedom? The argument is always over, well, will this make people do what's right? So if they would only argue over, well, where will the maximum freedom be generated? How can we make the law so freedom will not be infringed? The freedom of the whole will be amplified rather than helped. And there are, like I said, a small handful of laws like preventing robberies and rapes and murders. These type of laws are good for freedom, but there's so many laws that infringe freedom. And the principle of freedom applies to a lot of things, even like teachers such as myself. if a teacher such as myself didn't believe in the principle of freedom, then he would attempt to set himself up as an authority over a group to control them. Like, remember Jim Jones? He set himself as such an authority over the group that when he told them to drink poisoned Kool-Aid, what did they do? Yeah, they didn't even question. The few that were questioned were shot. I mean, by people that were blind followers. You either drink the Kool-Aid or you get shot. So the Jim Jones type of character, even though the people could leave at any time they wanted, they were under such control that they didn't question. And that's it is in many organizations throughout the earth, many secret organizations, many churches. The people do not ask. When they're told something, they do not ask, is this right? Is this what I should do? With any teacher, we can take his doctrine that he teaches and analyze it and ask if it's right or wrong. And if he be a representative of the dark brother, somewhere along the line you'll see where he will teach against the principle of freedom. This is the dividing line. The principle of freedom will be in there somewhere. In every teacher, freedom will be in his teachings, and that'll be the discerning point. The main mechanism for making the freedom of the whole effective is each person gathering at a certain stage of consciousness. A person cannot recognize the difference between freedom and slavery until he reaches a certain stage of consciousness. So we have to spread the Holy Spirit through taking upon ourselves the name of Christ, lifting others up to where we are in our understanding so that they can see what is free and what is not free. And the trouble is, like the legislators are attempting to pass a law, they will say, well, this law is good because it'll make people do good. They don't understand. They are actually thinking it will bring more freedom when it brings less freedom. They passed the seatbelt law, for instance. Well, that'll give them freedom from having accidents, or freedom from being killed if they have an accident. Well, is that a freedom? But they see it as a freedom, you see. And they don't see where the freedom really lies. The freedom lies in the choice. There's no choice involved in after the law is passed. But we must have the freedom to do what is right. Now, I have the freedom at any time to drink the Drano under my sink. So, because I have this freedom, how come somebody doesn't come by and say, no, we need to make a law that's against the law to drink Drano? Right. Well, the reason why is because people see it's stupid to drink Drano, so they just won't drink it. Okay? Now, the same thing with all the laws perpetrated to do good. We just need to raise our consciousness up, and we can just say, well, it's silly to do this, so I'm not going to do it. So you don't need a law. Once you see it's silly to not drink Drano, we don't need a law telling us about it. Do you need a law telling you to breathe? No. Do you need a law telling you to eat? Right. You might need a law telling you not to eat too many Big Macs, but we don't want that because it infringes on our freedom. We may want to eat Big Macs. We may want that freedom, even though it may not be the best food for us. So the principle of freedom is very subtle because every time it's argued, and this is where the dark brother works actively in the affairs of man, they will plant the thought in people's mind that they are working for freedom. And you'll see this argument where people are talking about taking away our freedoms in the name of freedom. They'll say this seatbelt law will give us more freedom from accidents. That's just like prohibition. Prohibition accomplished a lot more harm than good. And there are a lot of laws that do the same thing as prohibition. It's like these laws reforming campaign contribution laws. Remember McCain passed this big thing to reform, and already they're finding a bunch of loopholes in it, so they're going to get around it. So now McCain has said, well, that was just the first step. Now we got to go another step. Okay, so then when they get the other step, they'll say, well, it's still not working, so we got to go another step. And then pretty soon, I don't know, we may not be able to have any way to contribute money to help get the people elected we want elected. Yeah, Larry.
We're going to advocate freedom and stand for freedom. We have to understand and tolerate that when you first do it, there's going to be some people that are not going to help, support the poor or the elderly, and the argument will be made, well, they're not sharing the burden, and we need to force them to come along. But we have to have the faith that by our example in time, that we will show them that this is a better way, and tolerate the fact that they may not do all the best things at first when you have freedom.
That's a good point. When the Soviet Union collapsed, what happened? These people were not used to working and being self-sufficient. They were used to the government just telling them what to do and then just doing it, even though it didn't work. But they went broke doing that, and after they went broke and they were given a little freedom, what happened? A lot of people just sat around and said, well, I'm waiting for somebody to tell me what to do. And everybody was waiting around for somebody to tell them what to do, and there's maybe about 10% of the Soviet people liked the idea of freedom, and they were actually doing something. Another 10% were started the Russian mafia, and that created a lot of problems. So what happened after about a year into their freedom, a lot of the Soviet people were saying, man, we need to go back the way it was before. It wasn't that great, but it's a lot better than it is now. We got this Russian mafia over here. We got nobody's doing anything. Nobody's telling anybody what to do. Nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows how to operate this capitalistic system. And so then one guy rose up teaching that we needed to go back, and they needed to go back and create the Soviet Empire even stronger than it was before, and he was even talking about invading Alaska, this new guy that got about a third of the votes. And so it was kind of iffy there for a while, because when they were given their freedom, it just didn't seem to work at first. But now it's starting to work, and Russia is actually headed toward more freedom than the United States has. They're now down to a flat tax of, I believe it's about 13%, isn't it? Are you familiar with that? They got a flat tax of 13%. And before they were taxing people, trying to tax them over 50%, and it wasn't working. They've reduced the tax to 13%, and because people feel it's fair, they're actually paying it and not trying to escape it. And Russia is now getting a lot more revenues in at 13% than they were getting at 50% before. And the people have a lot more freedom, and they're headed the right direction. And this Hitler-type character that we're talking about is now losing power. Nobody's starting to listen to him anymore, because people are saying, hey, we're making progress now. Unless there's a big retrogression, we're going to find these former communist nations are going to wind up being richer than us in 20 or 30 years, and we're going to be copying them. The greatest evil that ever materializes on the earth is when somebody has a goal to do something good, and then they try to force people to do that good thing. That creates more evil than anything else. So if you have an idea for something good and you want to force people to do it, that is the epitome of evil. There's nothing more evil than that. If you have something that's good, sooner or later people will join it through their own free will and participate through their own free will. So if there is an equality created, it will be done because it works. Just like people do free enterprise. We're involved in free enterprise and capitalism because it works. We participate of our own free will. We're not forced to open a business by ourselves and to be capitalistic or to have a free enterprise system. We do it of our own free will. But if we take something that is good and we try to force people to be capitalistic, then it would be a terrible thing. If we force people to love each other, then it would turn into an agency of evil, of destruction. And, a lot of churches are that way. They try to, well, we're going to love each other, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do A, B, C, and then we're really going to love each other. It just doesn't work. Love has to be like spontaneous, and completely an agent of free will. Without the exercise of free will, there cannot be a true manifestation of love. And without free will, there cannot be a true cooperative society. And what the Mormons see as Zion will materialize, but it has to be done by free will. Joseph Smith was really into free will a lot, and after he died, those that followed him tightened the controls a lot on the people, and he made some mistakes himself. But as the church, not only the Mormon Church, but every other organization that has ever been created, the free will gets tightened and tightened and tightened until finally it becomes very rigid. And when it becomes so rigid, it becomes crystallized. When it becomes crystallized, then it can be shattered. And the time is coming when a good portion of the religions of the earth will be shattered. And they'll be shattered by a higher truth, which is beginning to manifest on the earth today. Suzuki, you got any new insights on freedom?
I think, when you look through history, the evolution of the people has brought on more freedom, and the more enlightened you are, the more freedom becomes natural. So freedom comes with enlightenment. And I think in a society where enlightenment rules, freedom will just come naturally. But until then, you kind of need a little guideline. Otherwise, people feel that they have the freedom to do whatever they want, including cause harm to others.
Yeah.
And so there needs to, until that comes, freedom will always have a reign on it until enlightenment and society will automatically make the right choices.
Yeah, DK talked about that in the LSA Bay writings. I think he realized that a lot of New Age type people are into freedom so much it borders on anarchy. And he worded it something like this. He said that I know there's a lot of people out there that they want to concentrate on freedom and all this, but he says, and they're anti-government and anti-structure. He says, but we have to have a certain amount of structure to keep civilization intact. And we went by a lot of people's philosophy. He says the civilization that we have would basically fall apart. And when he said that, I thought, that's probably true. If we just had each man for himself, like the Wild West. Even in the Wild West, they had to eventually get a sheriff and get a little bit of law and order going, because before, without the sheriff in town, in these cowboy movies we've all watched, the cattle ranchers go over there and they shoot the sheep people, or the sheep people are shooting at the cattle ranchers, and it's just a terrible situation these guys are in without any structure. But when a little bit of structure comes, and this civilization begins to show itself, then they have other problems, and pretty soon people want too much structure. So you're creating the right balance between the Wild West and what we have now is the trick. It's hard to do because we're like pendulums. We either swing toward total anarchy or toward complete control, and in that swing, we swing over the midway point, which is where the balance is, and we keep missing that. We keep swinging back and forth. But as civilization swings back and forth, the pendulum eventually winds down and centers on the point of truth in the middle, where we will eventually wind up when at the winding up scene, whenever that will eventually occur, or the end of our cycle anyway. Then we'll eventually screw that up and we'll have to start a new cycle. It's just the way things go. Hitler studied how to control people using hypnotic techniques with crowds. And you'll find when you watch how he controlled his crowds, the lighting was a certain way. The lighting was kind of dimmed down, and the cadence of the speakers spoke in certain we could call frequencies, rhythms, to control the groups, and the whole crowds were almost hypnotized. And people that were against Hitler turned out to be for him. And he is like, unlike Stalin and Mao and other dictators where a lot of people hated him, Hitler's people loved him, and that's what made him so dangerous. He was dangerous because the German people were so hypnotized by him through black magic. I'd say about 80% of the Germans thought he was a great guy and a tremendous leader. He was only elected with about a third of the vote, and then he wasn't really elected, but when the election happened, there was a whole bunch of political candidates, a whole bunch of parties. One reason I'm against a whole bunch of parties in this country, because somebody like Hitler could get elected that way. But anyway, he only got about a third of the vote, so he wasn't elected by democracy. Nobody got enough votes to become the chancellor, so Hitler wound up being appointed. So he was an appointed leader rather than an elected leader. And that's about the only way somebody like him can really get in power. But he quickly won the people over because he either imprisoned or tortured anyone that disagreed with him, and then people that agreed with him, he used hypnotic and black magic techniques to influence and control them, so that when he gave his speeches, the audience was sincerely moved. I mean, they were, if you watch these pictures of the audiences that he mesmerized, I mean, they weren't pretending like in North Korea everybody pretends to love their dear leader. You know, the Germans weren't pretending; they really liked him, and they cheered him on until the war started going sour, and then a lot of people started turning on him. So he used black magic, and the magicians on the other side were Churchill, FDR, some of the German people that rebelled against Hitler, but these people worked with the spirit of freedom. Now, the spirit of freedom is the spirit that makes white magic powerful, and people misunderstand what freedom is, and freedom is another very important principle that people misunderstand. What was interesting between the war between the states was that the South claimed to be fighting for freedom. Even though they were enslaving a whole race of people, they claimed to be fighting for freedom. And Abraham Lincoln made the unusual observation. He says, these people have a really odd idea of what freedom is. He says, I don't look on freedom the same way that these people do. Now, the same thing with the Roman Empire. When they had their slaves, they touted all the time how great it was for a Roman citizen to be free. And they said the reason they could be so free was because of slavery, just like the people in the South did. They could be free because they said slavery was necessary, and we're doing these slaves a favor because they're not very evolved souls. They don't know what's going on, and so they need somebody to control them anyway. So it's a win-win situation. That's the way they looked at slavery. It's win-win. I'm helping the slave out, and he's helping me out. He's helping me become freer, and he doesn't need to be free. So, but what they overlook is the fact that every human being needs to be free, needs to have what I call maximum freedom. Total freedom is an impossibility because, let's say, next door neighbor Jim wants to break into your house and steal your big screen TV. Should he be allowed that freedom to do that and then go and have no punishment whatsoever? No. So there's certain laws that have to be established that we have to obey to obtain what I call maximum freedom. Maximum freedom is the key, because total freedom for people that have no self-discipline is a disaster. So you need maximum freedom. And maximum freedom would prevent people from breaking in your house and stealing your TV or your computer or whatever. It would prevent your wife from being raped. It would prevent you from being killed by somebody that doesn't like you or beat up or whatever. So under the law, all these laws restrict primitive impulses that some call freedom, but produce maximum freedom. So even though I'm a libertarian at heart, I support laws that ensure maximum freedom, because maximum freedom is what we always have to go after. And in the case of having slaves, you don't have maximum freedom. You have a certain group that are okay because they can do what they want, controlling another group that can't do anything that they want. So the maximum freedom for the whole, not a maximum freedom for just one set of people, but a maximum freedom for the whole.
Thanks for listening to the New Age Christian Synthesis podcast. If what you heard rang true and you'd like to find out more, please visit J.J. Dewey's website at freeread.com. That's FREEREAD.com.